The Messerschmitt Bf 110 began its career as a long-range heavy fighter, but after suffering heavy losses in daylight combat during the Battle of Britain, it found a new and far more effective role as a night fighter. By 1940, Britain had begun nighttime bombing raids over Germany. The Luftwaffe needed an aircraft that could carry radar equipment, heavy weapons, and multiple crew members. The Bf 110 was perfect for this transformation. Its twin engines gave it enough power to carry the early and bulky Liechtenstein radar system. The Bf 110 night fighter typically carried a crew of 3 pilot, radio operator/radar operator, and rear gunner. This teamwork was essential. The radar operator would track incoming RAF bombers, guiding the pilot toward visual contact in the darkness. One of the most famous modifications was the installation of Schräge Musik, upward-firing cannons mounted behind the cockpit. This allowed the Bf 110 to attack British bombers from below, where they were most vulnerable and had the least defensive coverage. The Bf 110 G4 variant became the definitive night fighter version. Equipped with Fugue 220 Liechtenstein SN2 radar and heavy 20mm and 30mm cannons, it became a deadly predator in the night skies. Night fighter aces such as Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer achieved dozens of victories flying the Bf 100. In fact, Schnaufer became the highest-scoring night fighter ace in history. Despite its effectiveness, by 1944 the Bf 110 was becoming outdated. Faster RAF Mosquito bombers began challenging German night defenses. Yet, for several years, the Bf 110 formed the backbone of Germany's Nachtjagd, night hunting force. The Junkers Ju-88 was one of the most versatile aircraft of World War II. Originally designed as a fast bomber, it was adapted into many roles, including one of Germany's most effective night fighters. The Ju-88 CNG variants were specifically modified for night combat. These versions removed bombing equipment and replaced it with heavy, forward-firing armament and radar systems. The Ju-88 G6, one of the most advanced versions, featured powerful BMW 801 radial engines and the Fuge 220 SN2 radar system. The large fuselage allowed more space for radar operators and electronic equipment. Unlike the Bf 110, the Ju-88 had better high-altitude performance and range. It became especially important during the later stages of the war when RAF Bomber Command intensified its night bombing campaign. The Ju-88 night fighter also used Schräge Musik cannons, giving it a stealthy upward attack capability. Many British crews reported explosions from below without seeing an attacker. By 1944-45, the Ju-88 G series had become the backbone of Germany's night defense system. However, Allied radar jamming and the introduction of faster bombers gradually reduced its effectiveness. Still, the Ju-88 night fighter remains one of the most important and successful German night combat aircraft of World War II. The Heinkel He 219 Uhu was arguably the most advanced German night fighter of World War II. Nicknamed Uhu, Eagle Owl, the He 219 was designed from the beginning as a dedicated night fighter, not a converted bomber. It featured tricycle landing gear, pressurized cockpit, and even ejection seats, extremely rare for the time. Powered by twin Daimler-Benz engines, it had excellent speed and climb rate. The aircraft carried powerful radar systems and heavy armament, including 30mm cannons. The He 219 was highly successful when first deployed in 1943. In one night, Major Werner Streip shot down 5 RAF bombers in a single sortie. Despite its performance, political infighting within the German Aviation Ministry limited production. Only around 300 were built. Many historians believe that if produced in greater numbers, the He 219 could have significantly strengthened Germany's night air defenses. The Dornier Do 217 began its life as a heavy bomber, but like many German aircraft of the war, it was adapted to meet the growing demands of night air defense. By 1941, RAF Bomber Command had escalated nighttime bombing raids over German cities, forcing the Luftwaffe to expand its Nachtjagd force rapidly. The Do 217J and later Do 217N variants were converted specifically into night fighters. Bomb bays were removed or reduced, and powerful forward-firing armament was installed in the nose. These aircraft carried multiple 20 MGFF or MG 151 cannons, along with machine guns for additional firepower. One of the defining features of the Do-217 night fighter was its radar equipment. Early variants carried the Fuge 202 Liechtenstein radar, recognizable by its distinctive matrice antenna array on the nose. Later versions upgraded to improved radar systems with better range and resistance to jamming. The aircraft had a crew of 3 to 4, pilot, radar operator, navigator, and sometimes a rear gunner. Coordination inside the cockpit was critical. Night interception relied heavily on ground-based radar stations that guided the fighter toward bomber streams. Once close enough, onboard radar would take over. Although the Do-217 was powerful, it had limitations. It was heavier and less agile than the Bf-110 or Ju-88. Its size made it less maneuverable during close engagements. However, it compensated with durability and strong firepower. The Do-217 N2 version introduced Schräge Musik upward-firing cannons. This allowed the aircraft to approach RAF bombers from below and fire into their vulnerable undersides. This tactic proved devastating and increased German interception success significantly during 1943. Despite these improvements, the Do-217 night fighter never became the backbone of the Nachtjagd force. Production numbers were limited compared to the Ju-88. As the war progressed and Allied radar jamming intensified, the aircraft's effectiveness declined. Still, the Dornier Do 217 night fighter played an important transitional role during the critical years of 1942-1943, strengthening German night defenses during one of the most intense phases of the air war. The Messerschmitt Me 410 Hornise, meaning Hornet, was developed as a replacement for the earlier Bf 110. Though primarily known as a heavy fighter and bomber destroyer, several variants were adapted for night fighting duties. The Me 410 featured improved aerodynamics, stronger engines, and better overall performance than the Bf 100. Powered by Daimler-Benz DB603 engines, it was faster and could operate effectively at higher altitudes. Night fighter versions of the Me 410 were equipped with Liechtenstein radar systems and heavy forward armament. Some variants also carried Schräge Musik cannons mounted behind the cockpit. One of the Me 410's advantages was speed. Compared to earlier twin-engine fighters, it had better acceleration and climb rate. This made it more capable of intercepting high-altitude ARF bombers. However, the Me 410 faced several challenges. By the time it entered service in meaningful numbers, Allied air superiority was growing. The RAF introduced faster aircraft like the Mosquito, which could outrun most German night fighters. The Me 410 also suffered from handling issues inherited from its troubled predecessor, the Me 200. Although improved, it never fully replaced the Ju-88 as the primary night fighter. Still, in certain roles, especially as a bomber interceptor, the Me 410 proved effective. It carried heavy 30 cannons capable of destroying large bombers with only a few hits. While not as famous as the He 219 or Ju-88 night fighters, the Me 410 remains an important part of Germany's evolving night air defense strategy in the later war years. The Focke-Wulf Fo 190 is best known as one of Germany's finest single-engine fighters of World War II. However, lesser-known night fighter variants were also developed. Unlike twin-engine aircraft that could easily carry radar operators, adapting the FEW 190 for night operations was challenging. Some variants were equipped with radar systems such as the Fuge 217 or Neptune radar, though space and weight limitations restricted effectiveness. Few 190 night fighters were often used in combination with ground-controlled interception systems. Pilots relied heavily on instructions from radar stations to position themselves near incoming bomber formations. Certain variants also experimented with Schräge Musik-style upward-firing weapons. However, because the Few W190 was single-seat, it lacked a dedicated radar operator, making nighttime interception more difficult. Despite limitations, the Few 190 offered excellent speed, maneuverability, and firepower, Armed with 20 and sometimes 30 cannons, it could destroy bombers quickly once visual contact was achieved. By late 1944, Germany also experimented with wild saw tactics, single-seat fighters attacking bombers illuminated by searchlights in city fires. The FW-190 played a role in these operations. While it never became a primary night fighter like the Ju-88 or Bf-110, the FW-190 demonstrated Germany's attempt to use every available aircraft to counter the overwhelming Allied bombing campaign. The Heinkel He 111 is widely remembered as one of the Luftwaffe's primary bombers during the early years of World War II. However, as the air war shifted and Germany faced increasing nighttime bombing raids, even this medium bomber was adapted into a night fighting platform. By 1941-1942, the Luftwaffe was under heavy pressure from RAF Bomber Command. The demand for night fighters grew rapidly, and Germany converted several existing aircraft types for the role. Among them was the He 111, particularly in variants such as the He 111H, and specialized night fighter conversions. The He 111 night fighter versions were equipped with radar systems like the Fuge 202 Liechtenstein. Large external antenna arrays were mounted on the nose, giving the aircraft its distinctive appearance. Internally, the bomb bay space allowed for additional radar equipment and crew members. Typically, the He 111 night fighter crew included a pilot, radar operator navigator, and sometimes additional gunners. Its larger fuselage provided room for equipment, but also made it slower and less maneuverable compared to purpose-built night fighters. Armament usually consisted of forward-firing 20 cannons and machine guns. Some experimental versions were equipped with upward-firing Schräge Musik cannons, although this configuration was more common in Ju-88 and Bf-110 units. Despite its size, the He 111 could be effective in controlled interception environments where ground radar stations guided it directly toward bomber streams. However, as RAF bombers became faster and more heavily defended, the He 111's performance limitations became clear. By mid-war, the aircraft was largely phased out from frontline night fighter duties in favor of more capable designs such as the Ju-88 and He 219. Still, its contribution reflects Germany's urgent need to adapt available aircraft to counter the growing Allied bombing threat. The He 111 night fighter stands as an example of wartime improvisation, a bomber converted into a defensive predator in the dark skies over Europe. The Dornier Do 215 was originally developed as an export version of the Do-17 light bomber. However, when war broke out, Germany retained these aircraft and later converted several into night fighters. The Do-215 Bf variant became the primary night fighter version. It was equipped with early-generation radar systems, such as the Fuge 202 Liechtenstein. These early radar arrays were bulky and visually distinctive, mounted prominently on the aircraft's nose. Compared to later night fighters like the Ju-88, the Do-215 was smaller and lighter. It carried a crew of 3: pilot, navigator/radar operator, and gunner. The coordination between pilot and radar operator was crucial, especially during early radar operations when equipment was still unreliable. The Do-215 night fighter was primarily used in the early stages of the nighttime defense campaign around 1941-1942. At this stage, Germany was still developing its integrated night defense system, which later became known as the Kammhuber line. Armament included forward-firing machine guns and 20 cannons. However, the aircraft lacked the heavy punch and advanced equipment of later models. As British electronic countermeasures improved and bombing raids intensified, the Do-215 quickly became outdated. Production numbers were limited, and the aircraft was gradually replaced by more capable night fighters. Though short-lived in its role, the Do-215 was among the first German aircraft equipped with airborne interception radar. It represents the experimental beginnings of Germany's night fighting evolution. The Messerschmitt Me 262 is famous as the world's first operational jet fighter. While most versions were used as high-speed interceptors, a specialized two-seat night fighter variant was developed, the Me 262 B1A/U1. This version was equipped with the Fuge 218 Neptune radar system. Unlike piston-engine night fighters, the jet-powered Me 262 offered unmatched speed, capable of exceeding 800 kilometers per h. The two-seat configuration allowed for a radar operator behind the pilot, making it far more suitable for nighttime interception than single-seat jets. The aircraft retained heavy armament, including 430 Mk108 cannons. With this firepower and jet speed, it had the potential to be a highly effective night interceptor. However, timing was everything. By the time the Me 262 night fighter entered limited service in 1944-1945, Germany was already facing severe fuel shortages, pilot shortages, and overwhelming Allied air superiority. Only a small number of Me 262 B1A/U1 night fighters were produced. They saw limited operational success, but demonstrated the technological leap Germany was attempting in the final stages of the war. Had it been introduced earlier and in greater numbers, the Me 262 night fighter might have dramatically altered night interception tactics. Instead, it remains a symbol of advanced engineering arriving too late to change the outcome of the war.